What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Pavali coming at you with another 2024-2025 NBA season look ahead. We are on to the Minnesota Timberwolves, which means I get to speak with Kyle Theige from the Flagrant Howls podcast over at Score North. He co-hosts it with Phil Mackey, and also the Dane Moore NBA podcast, where he does a lot of appearances there, a lot of work behind the scenes with Dane Moore. Love both those podcasts. The Dane Moore podcast, especially if you're a Timberwolves fan, is just an absolute behemoth. So go find the work to all the stuff that Kyle does. That will be in the links of our podcast and YouTube descriptions. Go support him. You're in for a very fun conversation. This is, as I'm recording this now, the intro, the longest look ahead that we've done. We went over 90 minutes on the Timberwolves. So if you're a Timberwolves fan or someone just curious about this team, I think you'll enjoy it. Very quickly, as usual, though, just a reminder, if you've not done so already, subscribe to us. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, the whole nine. Ratings and reviews on Apple help us out a ton in the charts as well. Comment, help like our videos on YouTube. That'll help the algorithm love us back a little bit. And if you do all those things consistently, one, thank you, I love you. And two, tell people about us, share our episodes, share our content, come join our Discord. The link to that's in the podcast and YouTube description too. But that's enough for me. Let's get to talking lots and lots of Minnesota Timberwolves basketball with the one, the only Kyle Theige. Kyle, welcome back to the Hardwood Knocks podcast. Your third appearance, your second time doing the look ahead. So I'm always grateful when guests agree to come back after doing their first one or two appearances. Before we dive into just all things Minnesota Timberwolves, I have a very important question. How the heck are you doing?
I'm doing well. I was telling you before we hit record, finally in a house. So the last time we spoke on the mics, I was still in an apartment, but got my first house. My background is, if you're watching on YouTube, the opposite of what Dan's rocking. There's nothing in here but a plant. But you're my inspo on that. So I'm going to start to build up the studio a little bit because I woke up, I think it was yesterday, I woke up and I was like, we're like 2 weeks away from training camp and like media day and stuff. So it's been a nice summer. I know, if you take vacations or whatever, it's been nice to kind of get away. Football season's on, but basketball season's coming really quick. And then, I don't know, from a Timberwolves perspective, and I'm sure we'll get into it, probably the most exciting year we can think of based on what they did last year.
Right. I am grateful that for the NBA this summer, like the transactions were just like, there was the Larry Marketing like fake thing that lingered, for a little bit, but it's made it really easy to do these look aheads and unplug at least a little bit because there's just nothing happening in the NBA. And I fave it. I know people are starved. I'm like, I need this break. I need to figure out what's going on with the entire league as we go into next season.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. Well, a handful of years ago now, but where the like Andrew Wiggins thing dragged on into like August or something. So it is nice from a basketball perspective. Can I just have 1 month where there's nothing going on? In the NBA with the new salary caps and the CBA and all that stuff, it makes it a little harder for August transactions. So August was nice, but yes, you flip the page September after Labor Day, it's like, oh my God, I need to refresh on my favorite team or the league in general because it just keeps getting more chaotic as the season starts. So
I have one more tangent. So are we going to have, is the background going to include like some Leonard Miller propaganda at some point?
The background, there's a lot of options on the table right now. The Naz Reid flag / towel probably needs to be incorporated as well. But yeah, I got to watch Leonard out in Vegas during Summer League this past July, and I still believe. So I don't know if that's where we're going to start today, but I will say that Leonard Miller's stock is still very much a hold. And if you have some extra discretionary income, maybe a buy.
I bought last year
because
you told me to, and before the season started. So I'm holding as well. But this is not the 2-hour segment on Leonard Miller will come shortly. I want to start here with just what were your biggest takeaways from last season, because there was so much happening, not just the Wolves being good, but how they were good, what happens in the playoffs. And then, of course, all this stuff happening, not so much in the backdrop, but like the battle over the soul of the franchise from upstairs. And like, even was Tim Connolly going to be back? And okay, now he's going to be back, but it's still sort of a year by year thing. Just what are yours? We're moving in to this, period of thinking about next season. What were your biggest takeaways that are still kind of sticking with you from last year?
Oh, biggest takeaway by far is just the basketball, like the on the court stuff, and the fact that it was finally good. It was the furthest the Timberwolves had made a postseason run in 20 years. They've been around for as long as I've been around, Dan, so 35 years, to kind of age myself. And they basically had like one good season. And it was that KG, Latrell Sprewell, Sam Cassell year where they lose to the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. The Lakers obviously then go on to lose to the Pistons. But that was kind of the 2003, 2004 season was like the benchmark of like, remember the good old days? So for the Wolves to get back to that stage and to kind of show that all this all these years of rebuilding and high lottery picks and big trades and all this turnover finally paid off. It was the best season again in 2 decades. The off the court stuff with ownership, or what's going to happen with the front office, or even when you try to factor in all of those things, and then the new CBA and our favorite term now, second apron, that stuff sucks and will always kind of stick around. Ownership stuff, like the next big date is November for arbitration. So that battle is not going to go away anytime soon. But I think for a fan base like Minnesota, they just were so happy to finally have real, we weren't looking at lottery picks and ping pong balls in March. We were trying to figure out seeding. So I think from a fan perspective, it was just really necessary to kind of get that monkey off your back, win a series, right? They sweep the Suns, shock the Nuggets, and then I think kind of flame out against the Mavs. Better team probably won, but I don't think they gave them their best shot. So just a really, really good basketball season. And then when they run it back and have pretty much the same roster this next season, minus a couple of guys that we'll talk about, it's hard not to be really excited about, Dan, they're talking about them as contenders. Like, we're not used to that.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done our record projections or over-under stuff yet, but they're pretty. If they fall outside of my top three, I'd be floored. And I honestly think, despite what the YouTube comments might say a lot of the time, or some of the Twitter people, I enjoy when teams, especially in non-glamour markets, flip narratives on their head. And I did this with the Cleveland and Donovan Mitchell thing. I want those teams to go, I want a team like the Timberwolves to go all in for Rudy Gobert, and I want them to be good because I want more teams to do that. I want to be able to get angry at other teams for not doing that. And it was really cool to see Minnesota, just not the big model, just it's working. Rudy Gobert, his fourth defensive player of the year, and maybe playing. Some of it's tough to separate because he actually had good talent around him in Minnesota, unlike Utah, but some of the best defense in terms of mobility I've ever seen from him. Karl-Anthony Towns, still kind of just this wild, inconsistent adrenaline rush, but him having a couple big postseason performances, him coming back from injury, him having I thought he was more aggressive on drives. I just enjoyed that whole thing. Even the people who thought how good is your ceiling if Anthony Edwards is the driver of your offense? And there were imperfections, but I really just enjoyed the Timberwolves. For the most part, it came to a point where it was everyone was wondering when or how they were going to break this team up this past offseason. Yeah. And then it became very quickly before the playoffs, it was no, this team is just too good. Nothing's happening this offseason. It would be franchise malpractice if it did.
It's kind of funny, right? Especially in the league, and you cover the league from the highest view, so you kind of monitor all the teams. NBA is really about ring culture, right? Winning, at the end of the day, what are you trying to do? You're trying to win a game, you're trying to win a playoff series, you're trying to win a title. And it's funny how teams like Cleveland and Minnesota, they, as you put, are not glamour markets, but almost kind of get ripped for trying to win or trying to go all in. I don't like the term all in because from a Wolves perspective, they still have future picks. They have things they can do. They have young players. Cleveland's the same, but it does kind of seem like Utah was just given the trophy for trading two guys and getting all these picks, where in reality, it really did turn out well so far, right, for Cleveland and Minnesota. And from the Wolves' perspective, they don't do what they just did without Rudy Gobert. He wasn't the best player on the team, but I think a lot of us that watched could have made an argument that maybe he was the most valuable. Just again, after that Grizzlies series that was kind of Ant's first taste of the playoffs a couple of years ago, they left that thinking we probably should have beat the Grizzlies, and we lost because we couldn't protect the rim, we couldn't rebound. Well, what did Tim Conley do as soon as he got here? He just went and got probably the guy that best addresses those two needs. He went and got Rudy Gobert to protect the rim and get rebounds. So the first year of the experiment didn't work. 2 years ago, Karl missed 52 games. The too big thing was kind of clunky, but to see them again run it back, kind of, as you said, defy all the commenters and haters online and just say, we're going to try again rather than switching up the formula. We're just going to kind of try again and use the same exact ingredients to make a better meal, and it worked. And last year, it really showed by, they actually had an identity, Dan, for the first time since I was in middle school, where they came in every night and said, we're going to play really good defense, and we might slip from the best defense in the league in January to the 7th, but every night we're going to make you have to work offensively. And I think that's kind of what led them as far as they made it. And now, now they have to make some tweaks because I think they lack a little offense, and that'll be something that we look forward to this next season. Did the draft and some of the other moves they made, will that help them up their offense a little bit while still maintaining a really talented defense?
You touched upon an interesting point there, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it a lot, is we tend to romanticize the teardown aspect when you're looking at what Utah did on that side of the Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell trades, and then we'll hammer the teams that like went for it.
Right.
And it's the same way with player contracts where do you remember back what this feels like 8 years ago when Tyler Hero was like a darling, but then he signs his next deal and people are like, oh, that dude's overpaid. He's not valuable at all. I need to know like the psychology behind that thought. That is a random tangent, but you saying that made me think of it. We both agreed though that they were too good to like really, for lack of like just fuck with, like you shouldn't be like trading a core piece over the offseason. But was there any part of you just knowing about the second apron, knowing about the uncertainty upstairs, that there wasn't some type of cost cutting maneuver, from them this summer?
Yes. Like it's still something I think about randomly when like Best Buy's over here mounting my TV or I'm like on vacation. It's this in Minnesota Timberwolves lore, we kind of reference Charlie Brown and when Lucy pulls the football, right?
Yeah.
Like every time she's like, I'm not going to pull the football this time. And then Charlie's like, okay, fine, I'm going to kick this thing. And then she still pulls it. So from a fan perspective, you're thinking at some point, what's the next shoe that's going to drop? But so far, despite the ownership thing, which is completely unnecessary, and I think people are starting to pick sides, and I know what my side would be. I'm a fan of the side that has come in and led to actual change and brought in a guy like Tim Connolly and pays all the coaches. But at the end of the day, you don't really pay the luxury tax bill until the end of the season. Mm-hmm. So this team is facing, with the second apron and the new CBA, they're facing, I mean, I think, Dan, they're going to be one of the 5 or 6 most expensive rosters in the league.
Yeah, 9-figure tax bill. That's a lot of money.
And in the past, right now, we're going to say that Glenn Taylor is the majority owner of the team because that's a fact. And he has paid luxury tax payments before, but it's important to note that was 4 different seasons, I think, totaling about $27 million. Oh,
wow.
And I can't do inflation calculations on a Friday, but that's not going to be the same as what they're facing this season. Like, they're a contender, they're going to have a 6th or 7th most expensive roster, but they're going to have one of the 6 or 7 best chances probably to win a title. So everyone still thinks they're going to, no matter who decides and wins this thing and becomes the owner, that they're still going to pay it. But yeah, you're always thinking in the back of your head, like, if this team stumbles or, they're 42-40, like, are you going to pay $110 million tax? And my thing is, and I've heard you talk about this before too, but it's not talked about enough in the NBA landscape. Paying the luxury tax is one thing, right, Dan? Because you're paying money out, but you're also not getting money in. So when you're a non-tax-paying team, like, not only you don't have to pay $110 million, but you probably get a slice of $25 million per team. So it's a really big $140 million difference. And I know after talking to people with the team or just learning about the NBA more and more, that's like how they pay their expenses. Like that's how they pay for everyone on the team, and then the staff gets their own room at the Four Seasons when they're on the road in LA. So that stuff matters, even though I know these numbers for the valuations of teams are crazy. So yeah, this is the ownership thing is just a weird gray cloud that sometimes is a big cloud, sometimes is a small cloud. But until the courts, I guess, settle it, you're just kind of hoping that this team is finally good and that they're run by a really, really smart GM and that he has been empowered to make financial moves that might be spendy, but are going to lead to giving this team the best chance they've had to win a title in over 20 years.
And I do think I'm always reticent to give owners, billionaires credit. But like when we saw the Clippers run scared from this, when we saw the Nuggets run scared from it, the Timberwolves do deserve credit. Like, because nothing's going to happen midseason that dramatically lowers their tax bill, even if they make a talent shedding move. Mm-hmm. They've agreed to float this for a year. And I think they deserve credit for doing that. But also it was kind of just like, you have no reason not to do that because the Timberwolves boxed them in because they were so damn good. And that's what it made it easy, but it's also like, they deserve credit. We saw these other teams, like the Clippers specifically, make no sense with what they're framing of why they let Paul George walk. So I commend them for that. As we get to the actual basketball, and I'm going to let you dictate where we go here, what is the biggest storyline that you'll be tracking for this team, whether it's just to start the season or throughout the entire year?
Expectations. It's plain and simple in my mind. It's the fact that 2 years ago when they came off that when they lost to the Grizzlies in the first round, and Wolves fans will say that they should have won, and I believe that too, but the Grizzlies ended up pulling it out by just executing more. They made one of the biggest trades in NBA history. They go get Gobert. They try this 2 bigs thing. I think at the time that it happened, Dan, the league and fans like myself were still thinking small ball, small ball, small ball. And like, we're actually just going to, hashtag size matters. Like, we're just going to lean into playing big. And it didn't work that first year. And then it was like, they got to blow it up and stuff. But from a national perspective, you're right, it didn't work. But there wasn't nuance to like, well, Karl missed over half the season and there was a lot of change and all this stuff. So excuses or not, they ran it back. They had year 2 and they didn't have high expectations last year. I think their over or under win total coming into last season was somewhere in like the mid 40s, 46. I mean,
I smashed it. I mean, I didn't
yeah,
actually bet on it, but I was a little bit surprised at how low it was.
they smashed it. So this year now, again, all summer when you listen to, a Zach Lowe or you listen to any national podcast, they're talking about the Wolves as one of the 5 or 6 teams that can win a title. Well, now that the spotlight's back on you, Minnesota has the highest increase in nationally televised games this year compared to any other team. Like they're going to be on big TV, ESPN, all that stuff, like 20 some times. So how do you respond to that? Because Minnesota kind of had their best seasons when they didn't really have the bright lights on them. And now the bright lights, especially because of Ant and what he did in the Olympics and just his persona, the bright lights are going to be on them. And that's great when you're winning. But if you stumble, that's how you're on, first take the next morning in the A block. So it will be, how does a team that is still, and people don't want to hear this, but Ant is 23, Jaden McDaniels is 24, I think Naz Reid is 24, 25, Rob Dillingham is like 19 or 20. They have a lot of youth that's going to play a big role. Yes, Carl's older, Mike Conley's in his mid-30s, Rudy Gobert, but to me it's still a young team. And how does a young-ish team handle those expectations, especially if things don't start off, as well as they started off last season?
I could talk to you about this element of those expectations for hours because it still fascinates me months later. The Rob Dillingham acquisition, the way I framed it is I respect it. It was creative. And if it pans out, they're going to look like geniuses, but it was just wildly risky. And then you kind of compare that, just the idea of, you mentioned bringing in a 20-year-old on a team that has title expectations. Like, you really have to believe that the front office and coaching staff are in lockstep with how this is going to be handled, because we've kind of seen it go sideways in Denver over the past couple of years, where Michael Malone has pivoted away from, like, maybe not Christian Brown, but Peyton Watson against the Wolves last year, just going to Justin Holiday instead. And so I kind of want to start there with the move was, what were your overall, well, I guess let's actually start with what's important. What were your overall impressions when it happened? Were you like me when you saw the notification come in and it was like, oh, the Wolves have acquired the number 8 pick? And I was like, where did Karl-Anthony Towns get? Like, is he on the Spurs now? That was my first reaction.
Okay, I'm so glad you bring that up, because life moves so fast now in the internet era that we just forget things that happened 2 months ago. And it's important to take a second, time out, and be like, when that was announced that the Wolves were trading up to 8 with the Spurs, it was just like the Minnesota Timberwolves are now moving up to 8. And if you're a Wolves fan, you're like, well, that's impossible because we have no money. Like, we're poor. Like, we have no assets. Everyone said we're all in. So it'd be like, well, they had to have traded, like you said, Carl, or maybe they traded Naz. So everyone kind of had a lump in their throat when it happened. And then to find out that they essentially just kind of, and I'm learning more and more about this, Dan, as I continue to put things on my credit card, they just kind of kicked it down the road and said, we'll just take whatever we can down the road. Like, 2030? Are we even going to be here? Is life going to exist? Like, whatever. So once you found out the parameters of the trade, yes, it's always risky, especially for a smaller market, to do something where you're giving an asset that's unprotected or lightly protected, giving that away way down the road, because you don't know what's going to be like. But if you're Tim Conley, and I think this is kind of one of the most badass things about him, is that I referenced that Grizzlies series. He came in, and Dan, you know this, but like when a new GM or president of basketball operations comes in, sometimes they just have like the easiest first year. They can just kind of see what the ingredients are like, figure it out, and then make a move. There's like no expectations. Tim Conley made the Rudy Gobert trade like 7 weeks after he signed with Minnesota. Like, that's pretty crazy. So, but he identified, we need to rebound better. We need to protect the rim. We need to play better defense. Let me just go get that. And he got it. Coming off this Mavericks series where he watched a team that was really good at defense, but just, when they got down to 8 seconds on a shot clock in a broken play and they needed someone to just get a shot, it was like Ant. And then I think maybe the second best option was Naz Reid. They just didn't have a lot of guys that could create their own shot, create for others. Dribble is kind of my joke sometimes. So again, Tim Conley just identified in the draft kind of a weakness. I don't get the move from the Spurs perspective, even though I know they're kind of building up assets for when Wemby's in his prime. But to go out and address another need, that specifically, a backup point guard, a bucket getter, a guy that can space the floor and hit threes, it was kind of 100% approval rating. Again, at some point you'll have to pay that penalty if you're going to give up a pick. But is Tim Conley even here in 2030? Who owns the team? is Ant here? And I don't say that begrudgingly, like I hope he's here, but it's so far down the road. And for them to, and this is starting to become more national, it was kind of the first mover, right? In terms of this new CBA, we're all going to be in trouble. We're all going to be hurt from it. And Tim Connelly kind of found this one little sliver of like, like the GOAT path in 300. Like maybe we can just go that way. And maybe we can just use this asset that everyone has, but they haven't really thought of using to move up in the draft and to get a guy who, Dan, they couldn't spend $7 million on a backup point guard because of the new CBA in the second apron. So to use the draft to do that was really creative. And again, at some point in 2030, when I'm in my 40s, I'll be like, well, they don't have that pick anymore, but I don't think we're going to care because they needed more offense. They needed more guys that can play alongside Ant. And also, when you do it that way versus, I don't know, acquiring an older vet, you're still building up your foundation, right? So, I mean, for a team that's all in, Dan, and a team that has no assets, you kind of have like a core young four of Ant, Jaden, Naz, and Rob Dillingham, and they're all under 25. Like, that's pretty impressive for a team that's coming off a Western Conference Finals trip.
How do you think they will go about, though, juggling the development of Rob Dillingham versus the expectations that you're talking? Like, does he just, I mean, when you look at the depth chart, like, okay, they do have Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You can stagger Mike Conley, PJ Dozier's on this team. Joe Ingles is on this team. But, like, is he just the backup point guard?
If you listen, you said something about are the front office and the coaching staff like lockstep. In Minnesota, it's pretty awesome. Tim Connelly raves about Chris Finch, and Chris Finch kind of raves about Tim Connelly. So it does seem like those two levels of the organization are really hand in hand. But Tim Connelly has also pulled no punches of being like, Rob's going to play. Like it's not like the Wolves also in the draft, in the first round, late in the first round draft, Terrance Shannon Jr., who's more proven, kind of an older rookie, like 24, come and plug and play. But when you go get the 8th pick in the draft and a lottery pick, those guys have to play. Like that, we're not talking G League stints or any of that stuff. Like that guy's got to get minutes. So expectations to me, Dan, are the number one thing. But one of the 2 or 3 most important storylines is what do you do with Rob? Because Rob, I watched all his summer league games. I was out there in Vegas. The first couple games, he was really asked to just play make and not score. And it was kind of a growing pains for him. But that's what they're going to need. So there's going to be nights with his size and just being a rookie where he's going to be 1 for 8, right, from the field and with probably more turnovers than assists. And for a team that is a contender trying to, quote, win now, it's going to be fascinating to watch. I don't know if I have a firm answer of how long Chris Finch will give a leash, but I know Tim Connelly wants that leash to be pretty big because, again, he is, even with his rookie status, he's probably an upgrade over a Jordan McLaughlin in terms of just all the different skills that Rob brings to the table. He's more dynamic, obviously, than a Kyle Anderson, but he has weaknesses. He is small. He is not my height. I stood next to him. He is a small guy. So, and that's fine, right? We've seen guys like Trae Young make a name for themselves being small, but it's just going to be interesting to see on those nights where Rob might just not have it because he is 19 and he is a rookie. What does Finch do? Does he pull the plug early? How does that affect his development and his mental status? So that's another really, despite Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, and all these big names, what happens with Rob Dillingham in his first year is going to be really, really interesting to watch.
People keep calling him small, and I've never been with him in person. He's listed at 6'3". That's not like over. Is he like? Is this like 6'1" listed at 6'3"?
Listen, he is such a great kid, and he is so fucking competitive. So I loved getting to hang out with him and talk to him in Vegas. I like to round up. Everyone should round up and everything. I'm like 6'2". He's not 6'3". And I'm like $175, and we're probably on the same scale. So again, he's not. He can add weight. I mean, he's going to be in an NBA lifting program now. I don't know how much taller he can get. People have told me you can grow in your early 20s. So, but if I kind of joke about this, Dan, if he was 6'6", 210, the Wolves would have never been able to get him because he would have gone first overall, right? Like in a weak draft, like if you had a 6'6" bucket getter like him with that type of handle, I mean, Rob's going to enter the league with one of the 10 best handles. He probably has the best handle on the Timberwolves already, and he hasn't played a game. So he is small. He's going to have to learn that. But, look at who he could be out there with in rotations. Like Ant is super long. Jaden is really long. Rudy, like Naz Reid, like you're going to have him protected, I think, on defense where they're not going to be able to pick on him as much as maybe you would on a Charlotte team or something that doesn't have all that length in defense. So it'll be something to monitor. But, man, that kid wants to win. He has a cool connection with John Wall. Like he has a lot of mentors and a lot of people in his life that want him to be good. And I would be so shocked if he even as a rookie, doesn't come in and have some sort of a positive impact.
So you've kind of touched upon both of these questions already, though, but let's start with the positive. What would be the thing that you're most excited to see about him like where he'll leave the biggest impact positively as a rookie?
Just offense, just his ability to the Wolves. This is kind of a deep cut for people listening that maybe aren't diehard Timberwolves fans, but like they tried this with Jalen Noel, kind of another smaller guard, like bucket getter and stuff. Like, can you also play the point? It never really worked out for Jalen Noel, and then he kind of fizzled out. So can this guy come in and give them something that, they have so much offense with Ant, and Karl might be the best shooting big man of all time or whatever, but they don't really have like that type of player. Like, I know it's easy to say this, but like a Jamal Crawford when he was on the team, or like a Derrick Rose, just this guy that can come in and just cook, just give you points. And yes, Minnesota was really good defensively, but as you started to see throughout the playoffs, it showed itself in the Denver series a little bit, and then it really was highlighted against the Mavs. They just needed another scoring option or playmaker alongside Ant. Luka and Kyrie are probably the best to do it right now in the league, so nothing against them, but you can make comparisons to like if Ant is your Luka, like can Rob maybe eventually down the road be your Kyrie? And can those two guys play together? Ant's about as big of a shooting guard as you can have next to Rob, so he'll protect him defensively, but just that offensive playmaking, he was really dynamic in a couple of those summer league games. I think he had like a 16-2 assist turnover ratio in his first two games, which again, it's summer league. But that was big because they need another guy that can get others involved. So it's really exciting. I kind of thought back to the summer conversation that they were just going to run it back, probably lose Kyle Anderson, make a small move, draft at 27, and that was it. So for them to go out, I mean, how many times have you seen a team come off a conference finals or a championship run and then also have a lottery pick? It's pretty rare. So all of that kind of put into the blender, it makes you pretty excited for what this team could do on the positive end next season.
I think what I'm hoping they play him and Ant together a good amount, because one of the things that I really liked about digging into Dillingham is like he will get off the ball when he's not at his like best. He'll get off the ball really quickly, and the idea of Ant being able to catch it and like go after a careening bent defense already, I just feel like it's something we've kind of gotten away from because he's so central with the Timberwolves are doing offensively, and Dillingham might be the guy. Like he might even be able to unlock that for a Jaden McDaniels, where it's like if we want Jaden McDaniels to put the ball on the floor more, if Rob Dillingham, your primary ball handler, is able to get off of it quickly after bending the defense, get it to Jaden McDaniels, and he's able to attack. But even just seeing that element with Anthony Edwards to kind of simplify or streamline his offense, I think could go a really long way for this team. You kind of already mentioned this. I don't know what the precedent is for a team as good as the Timberwolves
right.
to add such a high lottery pick. And then what does that lottery pick do when he's actually playing games for said team?
And the team is still going to look pretty much the same in terms of defensive identity and offensive structure this next year. You're just trying to add a little spice with Rob and what Terrance Shannon Jr. can do, who's really impressive. His ability to get downhill and draw fouls and things the Wolves need. But one thing Tim Connelly has hammered all summer during any media availability is playing faster, or at least getting out into transition more. I mean, this is really, really dumbed down, which is how my brain works. But if you get stops on defense and you're really good, why not get the ball and turn into transition and try to just, that's easier offense than facing a set defense, right, in like a half-court situation. So with Ant, with Jaden, with Naz, but now also Rob Dillingham, who is super, super quick, super fast, and is really crafty around the rim, that might just be a way to, maybe it's not all going to be about fixing the half-court offense, which has always been a bugaboo for this team under Chris Finch. Maybe it's just about getting easier buckets. And I think Rob will really compliment Ant in that way, that just, hey, Rudy and everyone, Jaden McDaniels, all defense, like they got to stop, get the ball out, and let's run.
Yeah, to your point, they were 28th in average offensive possession time after grabbing a defensive rebound. So if Rob Dillingham or anybody on this team can bring that more pacing element, is there anything aside from just the size that would concern you, though, about playing Dillingham major minutes out of the gate?
Just again, back to that, Summer League is a good opportunity to learn, right? I know we love watching it now and it's all on TV and stuff, and we want our teams to win because we're already like missing NBA action, but they really put him kind of square peg round hole and said, we want you to focus on playmaking and then get your shot second. And if you really watched all the Wolves Summer League games, he had 4 games of that, and then the 5th one, a couple of guys were sitting out. You're kind of getting towards the end of your stay in Vegas, and he just was allowed to shoot, and he filled it up. I mean, it was incredible to watch. So the biggest challenge for him, and he said this, like he verbally said, it was frustrating to not be able to kind of do what I do, but I'm also super respecting of what they want from me. So he is going to probably be gifted the backup point guard behind Mike Conley. Mike is coming off, I think he played 76 games last year, which is the most he's played, I think, since like his mid-20s. That sounds great. Mike wanted to play all 82. I don't know if I love it, because as you watch down the playoff, like as they got through Denver and into Dallas series, Mike just kind of ran out of gas, and they need Mike Conley. You can make any criticism you want about why should a team with this much talent still need a 37-year-old point guard, but they do. He is so important for them on the court and kind of keeping everyone in their right lanes. So I want to see Mike Conley ball out in like April and May, which means Rob's going to have to be force-fed minutes, and is he going to be able to run the offense? I mean, again, he's a better player than Jordan McLaughlin, even though Jordan has been in the league for a while, but Jordan McLaughlin was a really good like table setter, kind of that point guard, in the Chris Paul mold of getting everyone in their spots. I don't know if Rob will be able to do that in October, and that's going to be a big question mark, because he can score, but they might not need him to score, especially if he's out there in a rotation in the early second quarter with like Karl and Ant and Naz. They don't need you to score. They just need you to facilitate and get those guys in the right spots.
Anthony Edwards makes the All-NBA leap. To start here, what impressed you or stood out the most about his continued development last year?
This is where it gets hallmarky. I just have enjoyed Dan. I've been covering this team for, I think it's my 8th year, and being here for the whole story. He came in during COVID. I mean, he hasn't even been, it was less than 4 years ago that he was drafted, right? Because the 2020 COVID draft happened in like November. And just to see all the different, like, I always kind of reference it as like years in college. Like his first year, he played alongside this professor, Ricky Rubio, and then he had D'Lo, and then he had Pat Bev, and now he's got Mike Conley, and he's just kind of, I mean, he's getting in better and better shape. Obviously, what happened with the Olympics and Team USA this summer was big for him, because he loves KD, and now he's on the bus with them, right? He looks up to LeBron, and now he's running pick and roll with him. He loves Steph Curry, and now they're like making TikToks. So I just think watching this kid who, it seems like he's been in our lives for a really long time, but he just turned 23 in August. He's got his own shoe. He's got his own, star movie on Netflix. And now he's a gold medalist, and he's coming off a Western Conference Finals trip. So just to watch him continue to get better and to continue to love basketball more and more, it's, again, I'm sure you probably would have preferred a really specific basketball answer, but I just kind of love watching, I don't have a kid. Like he seems like my child, just to watch him grow and mature and do all these things. He's about as well-rounded of a face of the franchise as you could get. And Minnesota really was, that's no shame to Karl or anything, but they just didn't really have that since Kevin Garnett left. A guy that you can put all the billboards around and all your trust in, and that is going to demand respect from like a national audience. And I think that's what Ant does right now, is he demands respect from the old guard or the national pundits or everything. So the sky is the limit for him. And really, as far as he goes, I think that's as far as this team will go.
I think what also helps, because you mentioned this at the top of the podcast about the Wolves being in the national spotlight more, even just looking at their national TV games. Ant's not just someone who seems like he enjoys it, but like he'll take so much of the criticism and it'll just roll off him. Where it's look at what he said about the older players in the NBA recently. Right. And it's just like to have someone who can kind of soak up the criticism or most of that attention, and they can deal with it. That does, by extension, make life, I would think, easier on a youngster like Rob Dillingham. But also, we know what the narratives will be about Rudy Gobert. We know what the narratives will be about Karl-Anthony Towns. And as the Wolves enter this next phase of, hey, we're caps lock contenders, we're not just happy to be here, we're caps lock contenders, I think having that magnet almost really works in their favor.
I totally agree. It's weird to think of Ant somehow as like the big brother, even though he's still one of the youngest players on the team. But there were moments where I think Karl-Anthony Towns had his best season, or one of his best seasons, and especially a good playoff run, because Ant just kind of had his back, right? And like same with Rudy Gobert. I mean, Rudy Gobert is always going to be a talking point among NBA fans and just kind of a punchline in a lot of jokes. But Ant's got his back, and I think that stuff really matters. And that's another thing too, and kind of my hallmark card conversation about his growth is just I don't think anyone comes in at 19 and can be a leader, even if you want to be. You just don't have the experience, even if you want to demand the room and run the locker room. But he has really grown into the fact of like he's given, post-game speeches in the locker room, or him and Finch are kind of 1-2 in ways to uplift guys if they've had a bad night, or he takes a lot of the blame too. Like you said, he's kind of water resistant in terms of anything that hits him. He's capable and confident enough to just kind of let it run off his back. And I think he does really enjoy all the smoke. Like I think he enjoys like, you bring it all to me, leave it away from my
Some of the
teammates.
stuff he said, he definitely enjoys all the smoke.
Yeah, for sure. So I think his leadership too is a big part of why this turnaround has happened, because they've just, again, never had that guy that, for better or worse, has kind of been able to walk what they talk. And Ant so far, we'll see again, because now the spotlight's on him even more after kind of a, and Dan, this, like he just kind of says what's on his mind. He doesn't take, he's been through so much in his personal life, and a lot of people have, that I don't think he really cares about what funny thing he says in an Adidas commercial. He's like, whatever, it's just
right.
a comment. So as long as he continues to back it up, I think he can kind of say whatever he wants. But again, that goes back to those expectations. Like if they stumble, or the shot's not falling, or he's just not having a good start out the break in October, then the heat's going to pick up a little bit. And how will he be able to handle that?
Do you think so? I think what probably impressed me the most was actually his playmaking last year. And I think that's still the area I'm looking to see if he can get even better in. Do you think that he's able to, like, is there a next level to Anthony Edwards, the passer?
That's such a good transition, because it comes off the Rob Dillingham thing, right? Where if the Rob Dillingham thing, you just realize early on, hey, he just probably needs a little less of a leash. He's going to be great, but maybe this season he's not going to have the impact. Okay, well, who's the backup point guard then? Because Nickeil Alexander-Walker is also coming off a really good year and is probably going to get paid next summer by someone not Minnesota. But I don't think he's comfortable running like the backup point. So while they did upgrade on offense with not only Rob and TJ, but also Joe Ingles, losing Kyle Anderson, who was not a offensive threat in terms of scoring, he was their backup point guard, and he was awesome at it. And he was just, losing him defensively is going to suck, but I think there's some offensive stuff that you're really going to miss, and it's going to be highlighted on cold nights in January. So to the playmaking part, yeah, can Ant kind of, he has followed a Devin Booker-like trajectory a little bit. Can he continue to stack playmaking to his resume? Because he can rebound really well. He obviously can score from any level, but if he can also just, if Finch realizes on a Tuesday, Dan, Rob doesn't have it tonight, we don't have a backup point guard, Ant, we kind of need you to also do this. I don't think in the past Ant would want to, because it makes him have to think a little bit more and not focus on what he's good at. But I think now as he evolves and becomes more mature, he'll be like, okay, whatever I got to do to win. So his playmaking, and if he can be an emergency kind of slot behind Mike, is going to be a fascinating thing to watch, because he's shown you flashes, especially like in that Phoenix series, as he started to just dissect the coverage. I mean, by game 4, Phoenix didn't really have anything they could throw at him that he didn't figure out and realize. So that's probably the area of growth that still has the most to go. But if he reaches his potential as a playmaker, then you're just talking about one of the 3 or 4 best players in the league.
Yeah, and I was digging into this a little bit more, and I feel like the low-hanging fruit is him, and he did increase the share of like his drives that ended with a pass last year, but it's still not like super high relative to people that use as many drives. But when I was digging into it a little bit more, this might just come back to Rob Dillingham, but it might be the overall spacing. Is if they can put him in situations where he's getting the ball and doesn't have to do as much work first before he's making that pass or taking a shot. I'm wondering if like better spacing, or again, Rob Dillingham already bends the defense and catches it and is able to play make from that. I'm wondering if that could help him take the next level as a passer, because the low hanging fruit for me is just, hey, you're drawing in defenses no matter what, whether they're on tilt or what have you, when you're on your drives, like get off the ball a little bit quicker doing that. I'm just wondering, and I guess that's my question to you. How much of that aspect of his game is more so a product of just like the half court spacing and personnel environment he's been working in for the past few years?
I mean, low hanging fruit, double-edged sword, whatever you want to say, the Rudy Gobert experiment has finally uplifted this franchise, and now they're a contender and they play really good defense. But you're kidding yourself if you don't think that he clogs up a lot of space, right? And when you have 2 bigs in there, even the fact that Karl can space it a little more, yeah, there were times where Ant was in a 5-man lineup with, let's just say, Jordan McLaughlin, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kyle Anderson, and Rudy Gobert. And it's like, Nickeil is improving as a shooter, but none of these guys can shoot. and now everyone's going to pack the paint, and I'm supposed to still kind of figure my way out to navigate this and get to the rim. That's why I think this year, and even like I said earlier about maybe this team becoming a gazelle-like team down the road after the Rudy tenure ends, is just what does this team look like again with 5 out? But you have guys like Ant and Jaden and maybe Naz that have learned to play better defense, because back like when Ryan Saunders was running the ship for a little bit, they kind of tried that, right? Like Karl at the 5, a lot of just spacing and stuff. And yeah, it opened things up more, but they were a sieve on defense. So threading that needle of how can we still play good defense, but also keeping more shooters around. I mean, this was the best defensive team in the league last year, Dan, and all they did in the offseason was go get offensive players. So they're going to take a step back defensively, but even if you fall from, let's say, 1st to 5th or 7th, can you go from, they were like 16th in the league in offense, can you get that thing up to 9th or 10th? Because that, to me, there's wiggle room to come down the defensive ranks a little bit, but if they can increase the offense, and most of that is led by Ant, that's how you put yourself, level up, right, and kind of fix what hurt you against that the Mavs in that Dallas series.
And I think the other question I have about their offense is there a way for them to make life easier on Ant in terms of his shot quality? I think he's actually pretty good. Like when he has to generate his own looks out of ISO, I think the shots he generates a lot of the time away from the basket are higher quality than the shots he takes and makes, by the way, at the basket. But this might just, maybe I'm just continuing to circle back to the Rob Dillingham element of it, but is this a team that is built to maybe simplify his life a little bit in terms of the quality of half court shots that he's able to take?
Rob Dillingham, again, Terrance Shannon Jr., who, if we're talking like the Leonard Miller arc of like, well, who should I buy penny stock in? I'm a big Terrance Shannon Jr. fan, because again, he just gets to the rim. He has a pretty good handle. He can space the floor, catch and shoot. The more guys that can score, again, this is pretty dumbed down, but the more guys on the court that can score and that are a threat are just going to open up and make things easier for Ant. And I think that is, you probably think of Team USA and Anthony Edwards as like the last couple games where he was mostly cheering on the bench, and it was the GOATs, LeBron and Steph and KD, kind of finishing things off. But during that entire run, I mean, for 5 or 6 games, Ant was like their leading scorer. And it's, again, he's not going to be able to play with KD, Steph, and LeBron every night, but just having those options out there, I mean, he had wide runways to do whatever he wanted to get to the rim. And I think, again, just having a little more offensive threat and getting Karl more involved, that's kind of always been the thing. I thought Karl, this is so stupid, Dan, but with these new TVs getting installed, they're like, hey, why don't you throw something on and just see how clear the picture is? And my first thought was always like YouTube Nuggets Wolves game 7 or like Wolves Suns game 4, just to see how clear the picture was. And I was reminded of like, oh my God, Karl had really nice bursts of offense, and that too just opened things up or gave Ant more space or just more time to be his big thing is a killer in the fourth quarter, and to be able to give him more options down the stretch to win games. So yeah, the more offense this team throws on the court, the more chances I think Ant can become more efficient, take less of those kind of mid-range shots. He still loves every now and then to really kind of beat a guy down and take a 20-footer, and Finch is okay with that because he knows that, I think from a shot profile, it's become more analytically friendly since he was a rookie. But if that can continue to grow too, and he's just really efficient, again, I know it sounds crazy for like a national audience member listening to this, but if he can become more of a playmaker and take more efficient shots and get to the rim a little more, what else would you want from him? And he's winning. What else are you needed to do to be a top 5 player in the league?
We'll start quibbling about his like off-ball defense and be like,
we'll come up with
15% better.
We'll come up with something.
So the bigs, the 3 bigs, the 3 centers, Naz Reid, Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. I won't list off the on-off data I put in our outline just because it just blows my mind to look at it on paper. When you look at what the numbers were from 2022 to 2023 into last season, just night and day difference. What were some of the biggest factors that led to the triple big model? Obviously, they're not all playing at the same time, but that triple big rotation working so well last year.
Well, he would probably not want to say this, but I think it's just Mike Conley. And Mike Conley is not the thread for all of those things, but if you remember, right, like they make the Rudy Gobert trade in the summer of 2022. D'Lo is still the starting point guard of this team. There's a lot of off-the-court dynamics that don't really gel, and then on the court, too, I kind of always joke that no one really knew how to speak French. You go get Mike Conley, you go get Nickeil Alexander-Walker at the deadline in spring of 23, and then all of a sudden things start to click a little more, and then this past season, it just really, half the team was like very much fluent in French. So I think having people that understand Rudy, because Rudy's not the best offensive player on the team. Rudy's not even the second best offensive big. It's Karl, it's Naz. But to me, it's still about unlocking Rudy. And I don't mean in post touches. I mean in ways that Rudy knows how to score, lobs and putbacks. Getting that figured out is harder because with Karl, you can space him out. You can just say, like, hey, man, just shoot 8 threes a game. Like you called yourself this title, like prove it type thing. So, and I also think too, and this is one of the reasons why last season was so fun for me as a fan, was that, to your point about blowing it up earlier, when things don't work in the NBA specifically, it's always just like, all right, rip the Band-Aid off, completely send everyone out, let's redo this, restart the console type thing and start a new 2K.
Yeah.
Whereas the Wolves just said, no, we're just going to lean into like everyone knows each other's name. Like we're going to lean into continuity a little bit. And I think that helped too, of just an off season where they were able to kind of work together, figure things out. And it did. It really clicked where now around the league, right? Like, I don't think Boston stole anything from Minnesota. Boston is a juggernaut, but you're seeing more and more teams now be like, hey, we're going to actually lean into size. Like, we're going to play multiple bigs. Naz Reid came in as an undrafted center from LSU and then kind of downshifted to power forward. And now a lot of us kind of think, like, is he a 3, right? Like, it's crazy to say this, again, if you don't watch the Wolves a lot, but, like, is he like an Aaron Gordon? Now, he's not him defensively, but, like, you can kind of play all those guys at the same time in small stints. And I think that in and of itself, playing Naz, Karl, and Rudy together is just a major feather in the cap for Chris Finch, that he somehow found a way to pull all this off, because that size, the defense got them to the Western Conference Finals, but that size on a lot of nights is what just kind of bullied opponents into, wearing them down and winning those games.
I have to go to Naz Reid here then, because you mentioned him. I don't understand, and I've seen too much of it, mostly from not, Minnesota media. You mentioned Naz Reid as a 3. I think Naz Reid, I want to use the word fantastic. I'm going to say, I think he's become incredibly underrated defensively. What is it that I'm missing where there's like this concern about, I thought his rim protection improved last year and he's always been pretty good on the perimeter. And I think that stuck for the most part last season. What is it like? What am I missing? Like, is there actual defensive concern about Naz Reid? I've just seen him painted as a fringe liability too often. And so there's either something I'm missing, or maybe this is a rare occasion where I'm right and a lot of other people are wrong.
Oh, I love those moments, by the way. That's what helps me sleep at night. No, Naz Reid, and this isn't hyperbolic or anything. Naz Reid is the greatest, like one of the greatest stories in Timberwolves franchise history. He's the greatest developmental story. Again, he came out, he was a highly rated high school kid, goes to a big program, and then he's essentially deemed not one of the 60 best players in the draft. And go back and look at that draft, and there were a lot of guys, right, that like Jarrett Culver was drafted 7th.
You said that name on a podcast that you did with Dane, and I have not. I was in the bag for Jarrett Culver. When they went and got him, I was like, oh yeah, they know what they're doing. And I had not even thought about that name in years.
I was like close to getting a Jarrett Culver tattoo, so I'm glad I didn't do that at the time. But no, I mean, Naz has just continued to work on his game. Like there was this is kind of silly, but there was a viral video going around the other day about him and KD and a couple other guys working out down in California. And Naz Reid has a guard-like handle. He is just hitting these weird off-balance step-back threes. Talking to people around the team, there are very few people that are in the gym in the summers more than Naz Reid. He's everything you want in like a folklore kind of player. He loves Minnesota. He probably should have made damn near double of what his contract is right now, but he kind of took a hometown discount. And normally you see those with stars. You don't see like, middle of the pack guys taking less money, but he did. He loves being in Minnesota. So he's continued to work on his game. I always laugh and joke that when he was in Summer League as a rookie, he couldn't jump over the free throw line, and that's painted on the ground, right? Like there's no depth. Now he can almost jump from it. Like he has just gotten in such better shape. He listens. He's also, when those lean years, because he's maybe the second longest tenured Wolf right now on the team. He's, when you say the most competitive player on the Timberwolves is, a lot of people are going to say Anthony Edwards. It's probably Naz Reid, and he takes losing the hardest. And I just think all of that, Dan, kind of factors into, he's never going to be Aaron Gordon defensively. He's never going to be all defense. But just the fact of this team doesn't always need, they have the defensive player of the year, and they have a guy who made second team all defense in Jaden McDaniels. You don't really need much more, right? Like you just kind of need guys to be average, and that'll amplify everything else. And I think Naz has been like, hey, if I can just be average or sometimes above average defensively, it'll actually look better because I'm surrounded by potential Hall of Famers on the defensive end. So him not being a sieve has been a huge thing for them, allowing them to play, because Naz has to play, Dan. Like yes, you have Karl making 60 million, and yes, you have Rudy making 50 million, but Naz Reid has to be on the court because just too many good things happen. He has that 0.5 mentality of catch the ball, kick it, dribble, or shoot, but he's not going to hold on to it and kill the shot clock, kill the momentum. So he was the biggest revelation last year in his growth, and now he's a guy that is kind of in a contract year again. He does have a player option next summer.
Yeah, flying under the radar.
Can't really imagine a world. I don't want to live in that world where like Naz isn't on the team. So again, next summer you have a lot of questions to answer and the ownership stuff. But for this year, I mean, dude, Dan, he was, not to get too gambly on you, but he was 80-1 to win Sixth Man of the Year before the season kicked off last year.
Was he?
And when you're 80-1, that's pretty much saying you have no chance. And he was a Sixth Man of the Year. So his story is incredible. He's such a great dude. He loves it here. The fans love him. And if he takes another leap, I mean, really, truly, the ceiling for this team just kind of evaporates.
What does that look like? Because like his offensive growth, when you look, and I think we saw this before last year, like towards the latter half of the previous season when he was playing a bunch, like he just continues to add these offensive layers to his game. Like he has a floor game, and that was true before last season. And I know his efficiency on some of the floaters and turnarounds might have dipped, but like Naz Reid has that stuff in his bag. You mentioned step backs. I think he only took like 4 or 5 step backs last year and missed them all. But like, if that's something that he's just able to do to have another counter from the perimeter, but like, what does, I'm rambling here now, but like, what does a Naz Reid like leap or another step forward look like?
This is my answer on it, but like I remember looking up his per 36 numbers, and I think his total rebounds per 36 last year were like the lowest of his 4 or 5 year career, and that's a really nitpicky thing to focus on. But in my view, while this 24 summer offseason, whatever, was great, next year is going to be the big one because Rudy Gobert has a player option, Naz Reid has a player option, Tim Connelly has a player option, right? Like he kicked it down the road a year of whether or not he wants to pick up his option and remain the president of the team. That's all affects or is affected by ownership. So for Naz, it's like if they decide next summer, Dan, that hey, we're going to pivot off of one of the 2 highly paid bigs and we're going to pay you again and you're going to be the second face of this franchise or whatever, they're going to need him to rebound more. Again, okay. I know that sounds really minor, but like his offense has continued to grow. He continues to shoot better from the perimeter. Again, he can get to the bucket. He can pump and go. So that's all great. And that's just probably just going to continue to get better. But, the Rudy Gobert experiment, as I said earlier, was because this team failed to secure rebounds in a playoff series, and Naz has never been the best rebounder, and Ant rebounds really well for a guard, but Jaden is always on the perimeter, so he doesn't rebound well, and Rob's small, and Mike, you just need more rebounding, and to your point earlier, like, can you continue to be average or slightly above average defensively? So he'll give him points, and he'll do a lot of fun things and make a lot of crazy shots, but can he kind of be a starting 4 or 5 rebounder? Because rebounding has always been, in the Anthony Edwards era, something that's kind of been a Achilles heel for this team when it comes to wins and losses.
Honestly, that's a really good point, because I think we can safely say that the 3 big model is not going to be forever. And so if there's a point where there's only 2 of those dudes on this team, he will have to play more solo big minutes, in which case the rebounding becomes so much more important in those stints. Karl-Anthony Towns, what did you make of just the type of season he had last year?
So again, back to my Geek Squad Best Buy story, but watching, especially in that Phoenix series, well, actually, you could make a case for the Denver series too, but that Phoenix series is highlighted by just crazy, Ant plays and talking shit to KD, and he had that dunk to kind of close out Game 4. But in every one of those 4 games, again, the Wolves hadn't won a playoff series in like 20 years, and Karl had never won a playoff series. Karl just gave them these bursts, and it was probably the most professional basketball he's ever played. There wasn't a lot of talking to officials. There wasn't a lot of theatrics, or as we call it in Minnesota, stray voltage. He just kind of played basketball. And I think, again, to my comp about Ant being a closer, sometimes all you need is guys just in that second quarter, that third quarter, to kind of row the boat a little bit and keep your head above water until your closers can close the game. So I thought, Karl's always going to be an interesting character, what he says off the court, what he kind of says on, or how he carries himself. But when he locked in and just played basketball and didn't really focus on any of the other stuff or trying to say the right thing, I thought it was some of his most professional basketball, which, he's 27, 28, like he's kind of getting into his prime years. You would expect that, but I thought he had a really good offensive performance in those 4 games against Phoenix. And then in the Denver series, he'll never get credit for this, but I thought he actually had really good defensive moments against the best player in the league in Nikola Jokic. So no one ever is going to stop Jokic or the Embiids or the Lukas of the world. It's just, can you slow him down? Can you make him work? And I thought Karl, as good as he was offensively against Phoenix, was as good defensively. And again, with a summer, the last couple of summers, he's come off of weird injuries. Like he had a wrist thing the first year of the Rudy stuff. He had the knee or the calf. He seems about as healthy as he's ever been. So again, despite, Jaden McDaniels is going to have a target on his back because he's making way more money now. Like, can you add a little offense? Rudy's always going to have a target. Ant is always going to have a target. But if Karl were to level up or just become, the best version of himself again that we've seen offensively, you're starting to figure out, if you're an opposing team, Dan, all these leaks, right? All these waters coming at you from 9 different ways. Like, there's only so many holes you can plug against the Wolves right now. And if Karl is, in my mind, taking 7-8 threes a game, I think that's one way to open up more stuff for Ant too. So there's just a lot of positive options that Chris Finch has at his disposal. And no one in my mind can take more of an offensive leap than Karl because, Naz Reid is a great story and Rob Dillingham is a fantastic rookie. But outside of Ant, Karl is the most talented player on the team. And if he can continue to level up or build off what he just came, a lot of monkeys off his back, Dan. Like, I know he didn't win a title, but, streets are saying that, like, he's made it further in the playoffs than Joel Embiid. So, he doesn't have to worry about some of that stuff now. He doesn't have to worry about the Jimmy Butlers, you can't win without me, because, again, not a title, but he was able to win without him. So it'll be a fascinating 24-25 season for Cat.
Yeah, I was really impressed with his defense last year. He's still, the way he moves, I'm always worried he's going to like trip over himself, but like he was holding up in space better, and like his just defensive floor navigation felt a lot better. The actual sticking point I have, you already mentioned, like, can we manifest him taking, like, he's only averaged more than 7 3-point attempts per 36 minutes once, and it was 2019-20 when he played in 35 games. Can we please, just for the love of anything, just get this dude to start? I don't call it chucking. I know people are like, forced volume isn't okay. You know what? Force the volume already. Like, he's just too good of a shooter to be taking like 5 threes, under 5 threes a game.
Dan, if you said you were the greatest NBA podcaster in the league and you podcasted twice a month, people would be like, come on, man, like, what are you doing, right? Like, so if you say you're the best shooting big man of all time and there's games where you take 1 or 2 threes, like, so if you want to be the best at it, like, and I think Karl's a really great shooter, like, then just increase the volume. That's why this pod is great, because there's so many podcasts of it. You do so many episodes. So for Karl, it's like, man, you just got to let it rip, especially on a team. Again, all the fun stuff that you remember of the 23-24 Wolves, you forget that 3 minutes left in the game, they just didn't have an offense and they didn't run anything, and there's a lot of bad shots. To me, Karl taking a 3, even if it's from 30 feet, is a better option a lot of times than what else they would do, right? So if you're in a late shot clock situation, I just want Karl to shoot. Even if he's on the bench, just shoot rather than like the ball touch Rudy's fingers or anything. So yeah, he needs to, and we try to ask Finch this all the time, and I'm going to ask him at Media Day again. Finch isn't going to put a number on it, but to me, I do have a number, and I'm with you. Like, if he just said, hey, whatever happens tonight in the game plan, we're building this out, we have this plan, but Karl, you just have to take 8 threes, or like you don't get dinner. That would be awesome for me, because again, his volume has never matched, and he loves the efficiency part of it, but it's like, we don't need the efficiency. You make a lot of threes, so take more threes, and that'll open up so many more things in driving lanes for Ant and Jaden and Mike. So I'm with you. That's probably my biggest complaint with him or Finch, is just, you have this weapon that's really unguardable from deep. You should just lean into it more, and I don't think they have so far.
And it doesn't aggravate me, but where a lot of the talking points have been like, oh, can we get like Cat in the post a little bit more under Finch? And I'm just like, no. Like, okay, sure, fine, as like sort of a safety valve there, but like, let's get the 3-point volume up there first. And maybe he's taking, you mentioned if you're only, podcasting twice a month, does that make you the best podcast? Is he taking the NFL approach where it's like their product is built around scarcity? And so like, he's the best shooting big man because he doesn't take enough threes. Counterintuitive. So I want to see him take more threes, and I'm hopeful that he will. I have a question about Rudy Gobert that has almost nothing to do with basketball.
Oh, my favorite analysis, actually.
What makes him such a polarizing player at this point? Is it really just, I think there are two things that people would lean on is, well, he gets played off the court and like it's happened, but there's always context behind it. Or, and this might be actually the most fair answer, is that people are still aggravated with his approach to the COVID situation when he made light of it before all of us knew what we were dealing with. But I just find it like NBA players don't seem to like him. And just the discourse around him coming out of the Olympics, this one like was just so toxic. And it's also coming from people too, where it's like, you really watch all France's games. Like
Yeah.
that's just like so I'm not here to say that Rudy Gobert is a perfect player. There's stuff that he has done that has aggravated me, but like what makes him such a lightning rod?
That's such a great question. I do think, because again, not to get outside of basketball too much here, but just society, like COVID was a big thing for anyone that's alive right now or like consuming any sort of content. So for him to kind of be, I still remember that night. I was at like a local grocery store and all of a sudden the Rudy Gobert mic thing and all of a sudden the league shut down and we don't know anything about COVID at the time. So it's like, did Rudy Gobert cause COVID? That's not a great, and again, no one really knew what was going on at the time, but that's not a great moment in time for him. But even if you strip that away, I still think, and we all had a friend growing up who was tall and gangly or kind of goofy. He's just kind of different. He's just kind of goofy. He's a great person, like being in the locker room pregame. Like he's just a really great teammate. But I think a combination of the COVID thing, the fact that, and I mean, I complain about this sometimes, that he's a mid-30s, probably future Hall of Famer that still really doesn't have one single offensive post move or like he doesn't, Dane Moore's always trying to get him to kind of do a little bit of a floater or something. He doesn't really have a go-to move that, back to my 6 seconds on the shot clock thing, like if he catches the ball, it's a turnover, right? Or it's just going to be a bad shot. So I think that, and then all the money he's made, and then just maybe a little bit of like the international flair, which is weird because I don't think like Giannis or Jokic or Luka gets any of the hate that like Rudy gets. So
Giannis has no bag.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I think it is just a perfect storm. And then, of course, the France stuff, he's getting benched. I mean, if you're getting benched for Victor Wembanyama, is that really the worst thing in the world?
That's my whole thing so he's guilty of not being what is like a one-of-one player at this point. Like in terms of I never thought I'd be in a position where like, I feel like the past few years I've needed to actively defend Rudy Gobert. And that is never a hat I envisioned wearing.
And he is the perfect. Pat Bev falls into this category as well, where you're like, when he's not on your team, you're like kind of bleep him. But when he's on your team, it's like, oh, I wake up every day ready to go to war for Pat Bev and Rudy Gobert. So I don't know. I think he's just a polarizing player, like you said. I don't think, again, the NBA, no matter what people say, to me is still like offense is cool, defense is whatever, because, when you're in their driveway, you're not working on shell drill. You're just shooting, right? So for Rudy, defense isn't as cool, but I can't speak to the 3 other Defensive Player of the Year awards that he won because, again, to be honest, I wasn't really watching a lot of Utah Jazz games, but he was the Defensive Player of the Year last year. And there were some other great guys. Anthony Davis is always really elite, but, dude, he took the Minnesota Timberwolves and made them the best defense in the league. Like, you don't even have to watch the games to be like, that's a pretty impressive resume booster. So, yeah, and I also think, too, with the France stuff, France was not supposed to be in the gold medal game, and they did it, and a lot of that credits back to Wembanyama. But when Rudy did get in, I thought he had big time, rim protection and rebounds and stuff. But I also think he's done everything, Dan. Like his resume, I know I joke about this a lot, but I mean, you and I are a couple pods away from making the Basketball Hall of Fame. Rudy Gobert's definitely going to make the Basketball Hall of Fame, and all he has left, and this is Mike Conley's motto too, all those guys have left is a title. I mean, Rudy Gobert has now got a silver medal as a host country in the Olympics. He's got 4 Defensive Player of the Years. He's done all this stuff. If he gets a title, it's going to be a lot of receipt pulling and a lot of like, what can you say about me now type stuff.
A lot of pretzel twisting, yeah.
Yeah, so I think he's going to come in this year. He might have the biggest chip on his shoulder of anyone on this team.
He's boxing now. He's ready.
That's where I was going to close, is now he's boxing. So he came off of getting choked out by Draymond Green in a situation where he was, again, he didn't cause that. That was Clay and Jaden that kind of got into a kerfuffle, and he kind of jumped in being a good teammate. So I think he's not the guy I'm looking forward to the most this season, but if he comes in motivated and says, all I want to do is win, because 2 years ago, the Wolf pumped his tires and said, we're going to get him, doing Hakeem Olajuwon post moves. And it's like, no, he can't do that. So just play defense, get rebounds, fill in space, and lead this team to more winning, because when they're winning, even the Shaqs of the world really can't say much. It's when they start losing, or that Luka 3 over Rudy in game 2 or game 1 or 2. That's when you start to see the jokes. But if they win, man, there's really nothing you can say to someone when they're winning basketball games.
Yeah, and also remember when I think it was Draymond Green made fun of him when he either cried because he got his first All-Star appearance or didn't, and that was like pre-COVID and everything. So like Rudy Gobert has kind of had that lightning rod status among players and fans like a really long time.
And for rewinding back to this playoff run, they were ripping. Draymond was still ripping them pretty hard, and again, they have a checkered history, those two. And then the Wolves kind of rallied around him and said, we're not going to send anyone to post-game TNT stuff. And I think that was, if you cover the Wolves or follow the Wolves closely, the relationships with the players and Rudy compared to the first year and to second year. I mean, again, Kyle Anderson and Rudy Gobert punched each other on the court. And then in year 2, we're like setting up post-game dinner dates with their significant others and them to like go hang out. So I think the chemistry with this team running it back, all the continuity has really helped. And it was kind of amplified in a moment in the playoffs where it's like, you've been talking so much shit about our teammate, we're not going to come up there and talk to you. And I think that was a really cool moment for this team in that locker room.
Look, as an employee of the parent company of TNT, I cannot condone that, except to say I absolutely condone that, and it was the right call by the Timberwolves. And Draymond Green is insufferable when it comes to that stuff. Moving on here. So I know we talked about this pre-playoffs. You came on the podcast. Jaden McDaniels then proceeded to do like his kind of best Jimmy Butler impression, where it was, okay, the regular season is going to be ghastly from 3, but then I'm just going to come in during the playoffs and shoot the hell out of the ball. Is there a level of concern either with that aspect of his game, or just how is he to get better offensively in this current ecosystem now where it's not, last year they're adding Karl-Anthony Towns' usage back into the equation. And now it's right. You have that plus Rob Dillingham is probably going to play a fairly major role.
Jaden McDaniels, I'm probably the most excited, right, to watch Rob Dillingham play real NBA games. I'm excited to see what chip Rudy Gobert has on his shoulder, what can Karl do. But Jaden McDaniels is probably the most intriguing because I'm on the Jaden McDaniels island. I'm the president of the fan club, but he was like the 270th highest paid player last year. I mean, he was a late first round pick, but he was making less than 269 other guys in the league, and he was all defense. So when people criticize him, it's like, you're getting this level of production from a guy who's making like $3 million, $4 million a year. Well, now he's making 600% of what he's making, right? So he's never going to rebound super well because most of the times a good defensive possession for the Wolves is Jaden forcing a tough shot, and now he's 30 feet out at the perimeter or whatever, guarding KD. So he's not going to rebound. He's probably never going to be asked to play make much, even though I think he has a little bit of that in his bag. And he's probably, and Chris Finch said this last year at Media Day, of like, hey, do you expect more of a pie for Jaden? And they're like, probably not. Like, in a starting lineup of Mike, Ant, Jaden, Karl, and Rudy, he is going to be the 5th option. And you bring Naz Reid in, and now he might be the 6th option. So it's going to be pretty hard for him to increase his offensive production. So now you're starting to just ask him to be more efficient, like hit damn near every corner 3 that is fed to you type of stuff. So, but if he's still averaging 8, 3, and 2, and they're not winning games, I think the heat's going to be on him a little bit because of his pay raise and his kind of rookie extension. So, but again, to the Rudy Gobert thing, he led them to be the best defense in the league last year, but they don't do that. And Rudy doesn't feel as comfortable in that role if he doesn't have a guy like Jaden on the perimeter, who every night is, in my opinion, tasked with the least fun task you can have of, hey, can you go shut down KD on Monday, Luka on Tuesday, maybe guard Jokic for 4 possessions on Wednesday, and you might also not ever get shots. I mean, you play pickup, like playing pickup ball, that would suck. Like after a while, you would just be like, give me the ball, I'm going to take a fucking jump shot. And he doesn't do that. So his role is really important, but it's also probably the hardest one for me to try to think in my brain of where else can Jaden stack production.
That's why I mentioned this before. I would love to see him in kind of the secondary units with Rob Dillingham, where it's someone who's going to get him the ball with defenses on tilt, and then maybe McDaniels can attack in those veins. Because I'm with you. I think it's really, the players can say, and he's been paid, and we can frame it that way, like, oh, he should be fine with his role. He's been paid. But like, to ask him to be that level of engaged on defense every single possession, every single night against the guys he's tasked with going after, and then not to be guaranteed anything offensively. I mean, what was it? His usage rate was still sub 15 last year, and it was like a pleasant surprise. Like, oh, it didn't dip much lower when they had all this stuff, and now Dillingham's here. And even if it's not, I'm not asking to see him take like 80 dribbles and create his own shot, but
Right.
can they use him in more of a play finishing role, especially when Ant is off the floor?
And Jaden is low key a sneaky good like cutter, and he gets it. It's just a lot of times like, what do you want him to do? Have a baseline cut? Rudy and Karl are standing in the paint. Like that doesn't really work. So again, I think I'm probably the most defensive of Jaden, another one of my children, because I just think he's being asked to do the worst thing. You know, just imagine being asked to work really hard and never getting fed. Like you'd be like, well, I'm kind of getting pissed off and I'm hungry. So he doesn't really complain much. Yeah, he punched a wall. He's had some kind of temper things that have followed him throughout his career. But again, like when I said the Wolves don't get to draft Rob Dillingham if he's 6'6", the Wolves probably don't get to draft Jaden McDaniels at like 28th back in 2020 if he doesn't have an attitude problem, and he's reined that in pretty well. So he's a big part of what they do. I know I said Naz is in the gym every day at Mayo Clinic Square, downtown Minneapolis, working on his game, but when he shows up, when he shows up, Jaden's already there. So Jaden McDaniels, one of the many new fathers on this team, but he is about as locked in as I think he's ever been. And if he were to, we've talked about so many guys, but if Jaden all of a sudden just were to amplify his production, his efficiency, his volume, whatever next season, I mean, just think about the fifth option taking a leap offensively. What does that do for your whole offense? I mean, it just kind of takes the ceiling again off and just says this team could, you know, be a top 5 offense in the league next year in a league that has so many good offenses.
I meant to ask this in the Rudy Gobert section, but you called your shot on Jaden McDaniels extension last year. You were like, I can't remember what the exact figure was that you had, but like you were within 10 million of what he ended up getting. Do you think we get a Rudy Gobert extension at all, specifically in the vein of, okay, he declines his player option and they lower his average annual value from there?
That's a fascinating question. He is eligible now, and we kind of did this fun exercise the other day on a podcast where we did, you know, expansions coming, right? Like who would you protect? 6 or 7 guys on the team.
Leonard Miller 1, right?
Yeah, Leonard Miller 2, 3, 4. Like with Rudy, it's like I thought about maybe you don't protect him because, and again, this is a weird conversation, but you don't protect a guy, he can still come back to your team. But his contract status is really unique. I said earlier that all Rudy Gobert has left in his basketball life is to win a title. He has done everything else and proven a lot of people wrong along the way. But Mike Conley is the same. Like Mike Conley was that dude at Ohio State and, you know, a top 5 pick or whatever. All he wants to do is win. Well, Mike Conley a few months ago essentially took a 50% pay cut in the next couple of years, signed an extension for literally half of what he was making, and was like, figure out what to do with that money. I just want to win. Will Rudy Gobert do the same thing? Mike has like the greatest approval rating in the league, whereas like Rudy's the opposite. So maybe he'll want every dollar to prove that he's worth it. But the Rudy Gobert extension is probably the biggest kind of leftover thing on the to-do list. They don't have to do it now, but again, next summer, they won't. I don't think this is like hot take or breaking news. Like, I would be 100% shocked if in the 25-26 season, so a year from now, they have Naz Reid, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Rudy Gobert. You can't afford to pay all those guys as the second apron becomes multipliers and all these penalties. So who do they decide to pivot off of? And if Rudy doesn't take a team-friendly deal like his counterpart Mike did, then it'll be a really interesting conversation of, does this team pivot their identity?
Yeah, I honestly think I almost would predict an extension, or at least a point where he's going to decline his player option and get a longer deal that's worth substantially less, just because the center market is so fickle right now.
Yeah,
unless you're like probably like 2 or 3 guys, you're just not guaranteed any set amount of money. And I think we kind of, you know, there's not going to be as much cap space floating around next year. It doesn't seem like. Maybe you luck into a point where you get kind of like the Isaiah Hartenstein special. Like even that, Isaiah Hartenstein got $15 million a year less than Rudy Gobert is making now, basically. So my guess is, and this is just based off, we saw Jared Allen do this in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think he's going to extend. Maybe I'll wind up being, and if it's not an extension, I think he'll be back at, you can call it team friendly. It might also just be market value at that point for a big in his 30 who is not an offensive star.
And he does love it in Minnesota. Like, I think it took a lot for him to leave Utah because he really loved it in Utah. And that's a credit to that city and that state and that organization. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't really, and you're the same. Like, we don't love talking about guys' pockets even when they're making hundreds of millions of dollars. I know they have other things going on and expenses, but at what point in your career, anything, this could be basketball, this could be podcasting, this could be a teacher, like, do you just say all the other stuff is more meaningful to me than a couple extra dollars? And to your point about the center market or just his role or view around the league, there probably aren't that many spots where he has as good of a chance to win and as large of a role as, I mean, he is the captain of that defense. He's the green dot helmet, right? So how many other teams in the league next summer can offer him that and offer him that comfortability? He's got a kid now too. So like, I'm hopeful. I'm with you that he does take a discount. What does that discount look like? How does that affect what is a crazy luxury tax bill? But yeah, man, I mean, 1 million dollars is a lot of money. He's making, I think, 43 to come down to 25. That's a significant pay cut. So Mike Conley showed that it's possible and that Tim Conley's really good at negotiating those things. But the Rudy Gobert one is by far, in terms of contracts and salary cap and transactions, he is the next domino to eventually fall.
Wanted to ask you very quickly about some of the other players on the roster. Who plays more this season, Terrance Shannon or Joe Ingles?
Oh, this one's easy for me. Dane, if you're listening, I win. I think it's going to be Terrance Shannon Jr. And Joe Ingles, again, talk about like Olympic stuff. He was DNPing for Australia, kind of like Rudy. I don't really care because I think what a international country program is doing for their international team is so different than what, I mean, Joe Ingles is coming off a really productive year in Orlando. He was asked to do a lot because Orlando has so much talent and is such a fun team up and coming, but they didn't always have the playmaking or the veterans. I mean,
and they decided to get exactly none of that more this offseason. So
yeah, listen, how Tyus Jones isn't the starting point guard for the Orlando Magic is disgusting to me, but that's probably for another day. Joe Ingles, though, is going to come in and, I mean, Joe Ingles in Orlando was kind of like what Mike Conley is in Minnesota, and now you're bringing him in. Kyle Anderson, again, I can't stress enough, as ugly as it was to watch him shoot or to do things offensively or to turn down mid-ranges, he played a vital role in just facilitating, and they're going to need Joe Ingles to facilitate. Also, what the team loses with Kyle on defense, they're gaining with Joe Ingles shooting. I mean, Joe Ingles can still light it up from three, so he's another guy that can space the floor. But I say all of that to just say maybe it was the desert or the drinks or whatever, but I got to watch a couple Terrance Shannon Jr. games up close, especially the first Summer League game. And it's so cliche, but he just has that dog in him. I mean, he was, I think, fourth in college last year in like free throw rate, just getting to the line. He puts his head down and he loves physicality. And I think pairing that with an Anthony Edwards is going to be so much fun. He did turn down a lot of open threes, which it's like, hey, again, if you're out there and you're playing alongside Ant or Rob or Karl, like, we just need you to stand there, catch it, and shoot it. But I think Terrance Shannon Jr., man, again, I am biased. I cover the Timberwolves, but I think we might look back when we do one of those redrafts and say, yeah, I know he was an older rookie, but that was a lottery pick that somehow fell into the late 20s. He is that good, and he, again, is not Naz or Ant, but he might be the third most competitive player on the team, and all of that stuff just really makes it really exciting to watch a team full of dogs.
I thought for a lot of last year that Nickeil Alexander-Walker had like a fringe all defense case, and I ultimately did not put him on 100%. One of my teams. Is his role in jeopardy of shrinking at all, though, because you're bringing in another Rob Dillingham, Joe Ingles, even Terrance Shannon Jr.?
You're the first person to say that, and I think it'll be something that we all locally start talking about more as we get ready for training camp in the preseason as the regular season, because at some point, again, you love when your favorite team has 15 good players, but no coach wants to play more than 9, right? Like, playing a 10-man rotation is really hard, especially when you want to keep guys, it takes 20 minutes to make a frozen pizza. If you try to cook it in 15, it's not going to be as good. And some of those guys need those minute allotments to stay in their rhythm and all that stuff. So if Rob comes in and gets 18 to 20 minutes of backup point guard and Terrance Shannon Jr.'s in, I mean, we're at 9 guys right now, and you're like, okay, so how does Nickeil fit in? Nickeil should have probably not made all defensive team, but he should have got the votes. I mean, he was incredible last year coming off. He's another one of those lottery picks, right, Dan, that kind of don't really know what happened those first couple of years, finally found a place that he's comfortable and kind of shined. His shot fell apart and his confidence wavered pretty heavily in that Dallas series. But, man, when you can have Jaden McDaniels start on a guy and then maybe throw Ant on him a little bit and then sub those 2 guys out, and now Jamal Murray's like, okay, I get a break, and then it's Nickeil, that has to just suck mentally. And that's what Nickeil was the best at. So, I mean, he hit almost every big three, it seemed like in the regular season. I always joked he was shooting 100% on late shot clock threes and stuff. So his confidence has probably never been higher. He's probably already priced himself out. Again, as I talk about summer 25, I would be shocked. I mean, he's a real true free agent next summer. I'd be shocked if he re-signs because, again, you're just running out of dollars. So
Right.
is Jalen Clark the up-and-coming kind of fixture to fill that role down the road? Maybe. But for this season, Nickeil is going to be really important because, again, they don't have a certified backup point guard yet, and we'll see what Rob can do. But someone's going to get squeezed out is kind of my rant, and I think it could be him at times, despite the fact that what you just said, he's coming off his best season of his career.
Anybody else on this roster that you think could kind of sneak their way into relevance this season, whether it's a Josh Minott, Luka Garza, or our joint favorite, Leonard Miller?
This sucks. If you're a young, or if you like the younger guys, or you want to see some of these guys get a chance. 2 years ago when they signed Kyle Anderson, I said it was the deepest team they've ever had. And then last year they added a couple fringe pieces, and I was like, this is even a deeper team. This upcoming one, as we just talked about, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, could he have made all defense? Did he have the best year of his career? And you and I are like, he might play less. This is the deepest team in Wolves franchise history. And because of that, you're probably still a year off from a Leonard Miller or a Josh Minott or a Jalen Clark getting real minutes. Luka Garza even was kind of like, I don't know, just a fan favorite because of all the work he's put in. But now he's on a real contract, and like credit to him for not a lot of guys that have that path to the league make it, and he's made it. So he's like a real NBA dude now. He's not just chilling in Des Moines, Iowa. But I don't think any of those guys are going to get real minutes. And if they do, we're probably talking about an injury or like things have gone pretty south. But I don't think that means that you need to completely cut them from your dynasty team. Like at some point, if they do unload one of the bigs, and let's say it's a Karl or a Rudy, they're going to need like other guys to step up. And I think that's what Leonard Miller's role is. So I think, what was it, Fran Fraschilla or whatever, or someone a couple years ago that said like so-and-so was 2 years away from being 2 years away. I think Leonard Miller is like 1 year away from maybe being 1 year away. But they have a lot of guys, right? I mean, again, you're talking about a team that was criticized for the Rudy Gobert trade because they had no pieces, no assets. And in Summer League, every one of those guys, whether it be Jalen Clark, Leonard Miller, even Josh Minott, they all had real signs of growth from the previous year to this year. So they might have a loaded Iowa Wolves G League team, but in terms of the big team and the pro, I don't know if any of those guys are going to see any time because, again, like in my mind, the 10th man on the team, if you go one of the best starting fives, Naz Reid, 6th man, Nickeil, Rob Dillingham, Terrance Shannon Jr. I mean, Joe Ingles is like the 10th man in this rotation, and he's just well more proven and trustworthy for a coaching staff than a Leonard Miller. So hold the stock, Dan, and we'll talk about it maybe next summer. But for now, I don't see any of those guys having any sort of impact.
Are you ready to enter the lightning round /
Let's do
cookie
it.
cutter portion of the podcast?
Let's do it.
So just as a refresher, it sounds like at full strength, their 10-man rotation will consist of, you think it's these 10 guys in some order. So it's the starters, Mike Conley, Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Cat, and Gobert. Then you have Naz Reid, Ingles, Rob Dillingham, and Terrance Shannon Jr. And you think those will be their go-to 10?
I do, yeah.
Is there going to be any finagling with their crunch time unit, do you think? Or is it just going to wind up being most of the time the starters this year?
Oh, that's a great question. It's kind of loaded because Finch does seem to always like closing with who brought like the starters. But I also wonder now with success and team success, and I know I've talked about expectations, but maybe some monkeys off the back simultaneously at the same time. If everyone in that locker room will just trust, I mean, they all love Finch like a father, but will they just trust Finch to close? Because I hate the idea of closing with my starting five because I think you remove a dynamic element of maybe that's not what you need in this game against that opponent. Mm-hmm. So I would hope that they lean more into kind of a dynamic closing lineup where, maybe you can close with like Naz at the 3 and Jaden at the 4 and Karl at the 5 or something like that. You know what I mean? Just the more options a good coaching staff has, the better. I mean, that sounds so stupid, but that just seems pretty basic to me of, opposing team knows that there's going to be different ways that they get defended in the last 3-4 minutes of a game. So I love Chris Finch. I'm a pro Chris Finch guy, but there are little things that I would like for him to improve. And one of those would be mixing up who he closes with to kind of better, not to react to your opponent, but to kind of give them different looks of you can't just expect that Mike Conley is going to be out there every fourth quarter with 3 minutes left in the game.
Is there a weird, funky, offbeat lineup you're hoping to see them try out next season?
Yeah, just like the potential future 2026 Wolves of like Rob, Ant, Jaden, Terrance Shannon Jr., and Naz. I don't know if that team will get a rebound. I also don't know if they'll be able to protect the rim, but just that's pure athleticism, pure shot making. It'd just be a fun lineup. Again, like they were kind of a slow, methodical team last year, and all the numbers like pace and offensive, all those things kind of prove that. I would love to see a team that has the closest thing to like an Adrian Peterson running back and Anthony Edwards, just have other guys around them that once they do get a stop can just get out and punish you in transition.
I think I'm at the point where I want to see Rob Dillingham plus 4 bigs. Like, let's throw the 3 bigs out there with Leonard Miller, and let's just see what it looks like. I mean, because they played 3 bigs in the past.
Yep.
And then you put Dillingham in there, and then it's okay. We could go with Ant, might make some sense. Or if you want to go with Jaden or Terrance Shannon was like, no, let's throw Leonard Miller in at the 2, or Naz is your 2, Leonard Miller is your 3. Just want to see what it looks like. I don't care if it's bad. Just give me like, I don't know, 10 to 15 possessions of it. That's all I need to see.
Like that's like the All-Star game stuff when like Shaq and 4 of their centers played. Like, give me Leonard Miller at the 1, Luka Garza at the 2, Karl, Naz, and Rudy, and
I'm here.
Yeah. Just give me like 4 minutes against like the Pistons and just see what happens.
Right. If you're up big, like just try it. Or if you're down big, just try it. As we record this on September the 13th, their over-under is set at 52.5. Are you taking the over or the under on that?
I just want to stress quickly, if you're not a Timberwolves fan listening to this, that's fucking crazy. Like, that is such a large number for a team that has pretty much, as long as I've been in existence, been a laughingstock. 53, and what's the math on that? Like, that's a pretty...
53 and 27.
That's pretty steep. I've always been an over guy, even when it's just lost me tons of money. I think I might go slightly under, and it's more of a credit to the rest of the West. And again, this team last year had to finally prove people wrong and shut people up and win a bunch of games. I think, and maybe this is already being told to us by bringing in 2 rookies that you're going to rely on, that maybe they're not as hyper-focused on do they have to... I mean, they didn't have home court advantage against the Nuggets, right? And that forced them to go on the road in Game 7, and they did it. So maybe they're like, hey, we're kind of like... We're not the Celtics, but we're a contender now where every additional win doesn't matter as much in February as it does developing and getting our shit right for April and May and possibly June. So I'm going to end up saying under, even if it's like 52 or 51, just because the West is going to be so loaded. And I wonder if the Wolves now have graduated to a level, Dan, where they can sit Mike and Rudy on a night and just lean into maybe that night's more about player development and getting guys more reps, and they don't care about wins as much. Chris Finch is so competitive. I don't know how much he'll do that, but I think the Wolves have graduated now that not every win matters. It's more about what you do in the postseason than what you do in the first 82.
Yeah, that's going to be when we eventually do these, myself and my co-host. My concern with them is going to be how invested are they in the regular season? Because if you want to develop Rob Dillingham and even Terrance Shannon Jr., I imagine it will come at the expense of wins. But then it's like, if this team is really about it, I would hit the over just because I think that they're that good. So it's an interesting number for them. When you look at the West, you mentioned how deep it is. Is there like 1 or 2 teams that you look at right now? It's like, oh, those are the most interesting, fascinating, or difficult matchups for Minnesota.
Again, I'm not smart enough to cover the whole league like you, so that's why I tune into your stuff, because you kind of see it all. I still don't understand how OKC was so good, and I'm probably deemed maybe as a hater, but I love what they're doing. I mean, how do you not love a team that has a bunch of young guys that are successful and they have all this draft capital? But like to add a Caruso and a Hartenstein to what that team needed, I mean, that's kind of like in the Tim Conley aura of we were lacking this, so we just went and got it. So OKC is going to be, in my mind, just the favorite to at least be the 1 seed. Playoff basketball, as we've learned now, is so much different, but they're going to be so good. And on the flip side, and maybe I'm a hater again, but it's hard for me to look at Denver compared to Minnesota. Denver has the best player in the world. They've won a title. I would cut off my arms to be one of those fans of a team that's won a title. But like their bench, like their 6th man is like Russell Westbrook. So while OKC and maybe like, Dallas, I think had a nice little offseason and stuff too, there are some other teams that are still in that contender sphere that I don't know. Like the Lakers stuff again. What did they do? What did Denver really do? So I think it's OKC in a tier of themselves. And then to me, it's like Minnesota is right there with like a Dallas in kind of that slightly tier two. And we say this every year for as long as you and I have been covering the league. Like the West just continues to get better. And it kind of sucks. Like I know Paul George goes east, but for every Paul George that goes east, it seems like 3 stars or 3 really good players come west. So it's going to be bloodshed. And now this team has finally gotten, to a level where maybe they don't need to always fight the toughest battle in December and January. And that's kind of, again, why maybe it's like 51 and 29 or 28 or something.
I know. I wish I had like a diverging opinion from what you said, but it's like kind of just the classic teams where it's like, yeah, like Memphis is good. Phoenix should be better. But like I look at Denver, OKC probably for sure at the top. And then it's like Denver and Dallas too. The one team I will say, and I'm not too high on them based off the way their setup are, but in this specific matchup, if everyone's healthy, I don't know what's going on with New Orleans' rotation in the front line right now, but if like Zion is just going to be your big, they are a fascinating matchup against, I'm not saying a bad matchup, but they become a fascinating matchup against a team like the Timberwolves.
Well, now that I'm thinking more about the West, and this isn't to bleep on the East, but there are nights in the Eastern Conference where you just get a free night. Like, again, until the Pistons kind of figure themselves out. Yeah, Brooklyn. You just get and sometimes, and the Wolves have shown this more than anyone, a free night or an easy night is not the best thing for their psyche because then they're all of a sudden down 12 in the third quarter. But in the West, like who is predicted to be the worst team in the West? Like maybe not San Antonio, but like, do they have Wemby? And like they added Chris Paul, or like the Kings even, who I never know what to figure out with the Kings. Like they had DeRozan. The Suns, who the Wolves showed, despite what everyone thought after Game 82, the Wolves were just a better team than the Suns. Well, they go out and get, in my mind, the single most valuable transaction in the offseason in Tyus Jones for the minimum. And like he addresses, Tyus Jones is a winning basketball player, cliche or not. So there's really no easy game in the West. And I think that's, again, what just is going to make this all really complicated, and every night's going to be a fight. But yeah, man, there's a lot of teams that if it goes right, we sleep on Memphis a lot because, Ja was kind of not there last year, but there's probably a handful of teams that you could tell me in April, like, hey, that team is actually the 1 seed right now by 3 games. And the Pelicans would be one that, yeah, if they figure out their rotation and Zion is what Zion can be, it's going to be awesome. Every night's going to matter, and that's going to be awesome from a fan perspective.
Yeah, there's 2 teams that don't seem interested in winning, and even Portland might be accidentally not shitty.
Yep, that's a good one.
Just because of like, they're going to be bad, but they just have so many good players, and to the point you don't understand what they're doing at the moment. Kyle, you have given me more than 90 minutes. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed, I haven't asked you about, that you would like to touch upon before I let you skedaddle?
No, I kind of highlighted this at the top, but 90 minutes of pretty pro Timberwolves propaganda, and none of it might matter if this arbitration hearing in November between Glenn Taylor and then Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez, if that goes south, because again, I have my side and I have my belief in how this will play out. But if it doesn't go in a good way, you're looking at a team that, 12 months from now might have a new president of basketball operations, might have a new or same owner. And how does that affect everything that trickles down? I always try to stress this anytime I'm on a pod, but this is basketball. This is a kind of an escape for us, a distraction on stuff. But basketball organizations are run kind of like normal organizations, right? So the Timberwolves are still kind of like Google or Apple. Like they still have a lot of power dynamics and drama and hierarchy. And if the top of the food chain is messy or gray or not clear or well run, it does affect every other level below it. So I'm bullish on this team. I think they can win 50 games, and I think they're a real 6 or 7 team contender to win a title, which is crazy to say, but it can all be pulled out from under them with like the Lucy football thing if the ownership thing goes in a bad way. So it'll be a fascinating start to the season because it's all going to be about basketball. But as we start to cook that turkey in November, it's going to be like, okay, so who was actually signing all these checks?
And look, honestly, the stakes this season are higher or more rickety than they were last season because you have 100%. Rudy Gobert, 100%. Naz, and Na entering free agency next summer on top. So like everyone could have come back. It wasn't a matter of, oh, we have to repay. Oh, like Kyle Anderson, of course, like that's a loss. Yep. But the fact that you have 3 of your, top 7 guys from last year are going to be entering free agency on top of, oh, this is now the first year we've gone into the second apron, on top of, okay, what is going on at the top, on top of, all right, does Tim Connolly want to stick around? The stakes are higher this season. They're trying to make a harder leap, which is just, They went from good to contender last year. Now it's like, can we go to contender to caps lock contender, basically? And so I hope I don't want to say I hope it doesn't get talked about because you want the focus to be on basketball, but like you do kind of have to keep 1.5 eyes on what is going to happen after this coming season.
And again, that comes back to expectations, right? If things are going well, I don't think anyone's going to really care who wins the legal dispute to
Right.
own this team. But if things don't go well, I mean, again, the day that it was announced that Glenn Taylor was pulling the team off, not for sale anymore and taking the sign out of the yard, was the day that they went and played the Nuggets. Like every time Glenn kind of steps into it, it's like at a really big time for the team. And credit to Tim Conley and Chris Finch, but they've done a pretty good job of kind of being like that meme of the shield protecting, the little guy sleeping. So
Okay.
as long as they're around, they're kind of the meat shield for any of the drama. It's a really good locker room. It's a really tight knit group, but all it takes is for the thing at the top of the food chain to kind of be disrupted, and then it's all going to trickle down. So it sucks to say that because the team is finally good, but that's also just, if you're a Timberwolves fan, that's just kind of the experience, right? Like, I don't know if I've said this to you before, but in Ricky Bobby, when they're at Applebee's having dinner and the dad's just like, everything's going too well, I got to cause some chaos. That's kind of the Timberwolves. It's like when things are going really well, someone's like, we got to kind of disrupt the apple cart a little bit. So, yeah, there's never an easy day or a sleep or an easy sleep when you're a Timberwolves fan, but this is about as good as it's ever been since I've been around.
Kyle, are you able to just tell our listeners, watchers, where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
Yeah, at Kyle Teige on Twitter. I co-host Flagrant Howls over at Score North with Phil Mackey, and then I'm working for Dane Moore again this year, doing a lot of Dane Moore NBA podcasts. That show continues to grow too. So a lot of Timberwolves content, a lot of podcasts, and it's just been great. Again, people that support us. You and I know this. This is like the coolest job in the world. So shout out to everyone that supports my stuff and supports Dan's stuff, because without you, I don't think we'd be doing this. So it's an exciting time. I'm really ramped up again for basketball. Got a new TV, Dan. So bring on training camp, bring on media day, and bring on the preseason.
You can all find the links to everything that Kyle does in our podcast and YouTube description. So go support him and those podcasts specifically. I love the Day More NBA show. Kyle, thank you so much for all of your time. Very generous as usual. And as you know by now, I will be pestering you again in the future.
Thank you, sir.